Jim was always a conservative man. Sure, in passing he would nod and mutter a hello, but that was about it. I just figured he liked his privacy, and that was all. However now, I think he may have been involved in something most of us can't even comprehend. Something straight out of a movie, something that shouldn't exist. The last few weeks Jim somewhat opened up to me, at least for him anyways. It was the most I had seen or heard from him in the 13 years we've spent as next-door neighbors. The conversions were strange, to put it mildly. Now he's sitting in the county jail, a prime suspect in a murder case. At first the news was just shocking. He's always been kind of strange. My wife, Kimberly, said as she shrugged her shoulders. I'm telling you, Kim, some of the stuff he said. What he hinted to. It all just feels wrong to me, I said, scratching me head. The last few times Jim and I spoke, I thought he was honestly on drugs or something. If they say I did something, hurt someone, or anything like that, just know, it wasn't the real me. Jim randomly said to me one night as we were both taking out our trash at the same time. What do you mean, Jim? I chuckled nervously. Something about the way he said it, like he was defeated. As if something bad were about to happen to him and there was nothing he could do about it. I tried to stop it, I really did. He mumbled as he scurried back into his house. Our conversations remained the same for weeks, him telling me not to believe whatever they said about him. I tried asking him who they were, but he didn't answer. I tried asking what he meant by not the real him, but again, he didn't answer. I started to think that maybe he was getting dementia or some other horrible disease. He was in his early 60s, so I guess it was possible. 2 nights ago he was arrested, tossing the thoughts of dementia out the window. The things he had said to me replayed over and over in my head, like a recording. The only information the police would give me was that he was a prime suspect in a double homicide. I wasn't able to sleep the first night after he was a suspect. I couldn't stop thinking about the past few weeks and what Jim had meant. Was someone framing him? If he was being framed, I wanted to help him. I could never relax knowing he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars while the real killer walked freely. Kim was starting to get worried about me. I wasn't eating well either. I stayed up almost all night the past 2 days looking out my window, watching Jim's house for some reason. I don't know why I had this overwhelming urge to watch his house, but I did. The first night nothing too weird happened. However, around 1:30 in the morning his bedroom light flicked on for a fraction of a second before shutting back off. I stood up so quick I knocked over the kitchen chair I had pulled up and was sitting in. I strained to see something, a shadow or a curtain move, anything. But nothing happened after that. I watched for probably 2 more hours after that, expecting more action, but of course, there was nothing. The next day I was dragging ass at work, barely able to focus on my work. I had to explain to 5 different co-workers that I was fine, just tired. I was more than relieved when 3 p.m. came around, signaling the end of my shift. Kim wouldn't be home until 6, so I had plenty of time to nap. I awoke hours later to Kim shaking me awake. It was already dark outside. Damn it, it's Sean, you're never gonna sleep tonight. She tossed her hands in the air and stormed off. I felt a little bad, I've always been in bed at 10 p.m. next to Kim. Last night while I was staring out the window she too struggled with sleep. Apparently it was hard for her to sleep without me in bed next to her. I apologized and told her I promised that the following night I'd be in bed at 10 on the dot. She sighed and smiled, satisfied with my promise. As night rolled around I pulled my chair up to the same window and prepared for my night of security watch. As expected, the first 4 hours was brutally boring. Not a damn thing happened, not even the light flickering. That is until around 2 a.m. just as I was about to give up and crawl in bed, movement caught my eye. I squinted to get a better look, to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was. It moved again. As I looked into what would have been Jim's living room I saw a shadow dart quickly across the room. The only reason I could see it was because the street light shone directly into his window. My heart rate quickened and I froze, not daring to miss a thing. "Where'd you go?" I whispered, barely audible to my own ears. You can imagine my shock when just as I finished my sentence, a head poked around the corner of the window, staring directly at me. There was no way it could have heard me, not from way over there. I could feel my own pulse drumming away in my ears. We stared at each other for a solid 30 seconds when all of a sudden, the light flicked on in his living room. I gasped out loud at what was staring back at me. It was Jim. I don't know how, but it was definitely him. I instinctively scooted away from the window, afraid to look at him any longer. After a minute or so I finally worked up the courage to look again. When I did, he was gone, and the light was turned back off. I scanned his whole yard and house as best as I could from the safety of my window. 3 soft knocks at my door sent me flying through the air, yelping like an injured dog. It startled me so bad. Whoever was at my door knew I was in here now. I cursed myself under my breath. I got up, walked to the door, looking through the peephole. I knew exactly who it was gonna be, but I still wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was Jim again, only some things about him were off. Even through the peephole I could see how unproportionate his limbs were to his body. His arms were way too long, in contrast to his extra short legs. It looked very strange, but in a creepy way. His head looked to be too heavy for his neck as it hung loosely. He had to roll his eyes up to look back at me. Somehow I knew he could me. Go away or I'm calling the police, I shouted with as an authoritative voice as I could. The laugh I heard from the other side of that door, it wasn't human. It was somewhere in between a cackle and a donkey screaming. It sent chills down my spine as I stood speechless, too afraid to move. Sean? Who's here? Kim stood at our bedroom door, wiping the sleep from her eyes. I thought about telling her the truth but decided against it. I didn't want her to think I was crazy and also didn't want to scare her. Some damn punks playing pranks, it's fine, just go back to bed, babe. I lied. She stared at me a second longer before turning and walking back to bed. I slowly crept to the peephole and checked to see if fake Jim was still there. Thankfully he was gone. I double-checked the doors and windows were locked before heading to bed myself. Once again I barely slept. I called into work today and did as much research as I could, trying to find any other accounts like my own. I found a couple of similarities but nothing quite the same. This is why I'm posting here on Reddit. I'm looking for help or information on what I could be dealing with here. Thanks in advance for any information I receive, and I'll be sure to update if anything else happens. I'm honestly afraid of what's to come tonight.